recently did one on kind of from an international perspective as well, which is really good. So thank you all for kind of attending. I wonder actually, before I do this, would it be best to go through the ground rules first and then we can do introductions? What do you think, Jason? And then we can record.
Yes, good idea. I'm so sorry, I pressed record already, so I can do stopping that. So yeah, you're seeing from the email, just to make sure that please do keep your cameras off and also your microphones on mute this whole time, just so that we can minimize any disruptions. And we will be having a Q&A section in the last 30 minutes, and this will be done via Slido. So please do submit as many questions as possible. And if you have used Slido before, you know that you can upvote any questions that you would like to be answered. And we'll kind of go through the list and answer the most relevant questions to this workshop. So kind of focusing specifically on application process. And just a caveat that we will be providing general advice, and we can answer general questions, but unfortunately we can't answer specific questions or provide any specific advice that's unique to your individual circumstances because of capacity. So we hope that you'll understand that. And yeah, I think that is all for ground rules. Thank you.
Fabulous. Was there anything to add, Malina, by the way?
No, that's all good. I'm just adding the Slido link into the chat, but I might add it a few times because I think people only see the chat when they join. So I might just keep re-adding it. Sorry, everyone.
Thank you for that. Okay, so let's just go on with a round of introductions. So my name is Vicky. I'm a second year King's student. Jason, do you want to go ahead? And then you can throw the baton somewhere else.
Yes, so hi everyone, my name is Jason and I am a first year trainee, well, soon to be second year trainee at King's. Lovely to meet you.
Hi everyone, I'm Alvina. I'm a second year trainee at King's.
I'll jump in. Hi, I'm Ali. I'm an incoming trainee for the next, kind of my first incoming into the first year. And yeah, I'll be a co-lead on the freaking access committee as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Zoe. I'm an outgoing third year, and I completed training with a young child. So if anyone has any particular interest in what that is like, I'm happy to address questions today.
Fabulous. Thanks, everyone. So obviously you can see that we've got, you know, a range of people from across all the years, even outgoing and incoming. We also have someone who's qualified who will be joining us at 1 o'clock, Layla, hopefully for the Q&A. So she'll be jumping in and supporting with that. So just before we get started, I'm just going to give a brief itinerary of maybe what's to be expected for the next hour until 1. Firstly, as we mentioned, this is kind of an application workshop. So what we're going to do is essentially go through kind of Clearinghouse and work our way through like a sample form. And the way it's going to be structured, and we thought might be the best use of our time, would be for all 5 of us to essentially kind of just contribute, share our reflections, and essentially kind of engage on how we found kind of completing the application ourselves as well, as we've kind of gone through kind of the doctorate. Now, we do recognize that we've all joined, we're at different years, and the application process has changed. Even the Clearinghouse website has completely changed. So I am aware of that. I think Alistair has a little bit more insight into the realm of how it's like in terms of this year. However, having said that, hopefully you'll still get some information that proves to be somewhat useful, I think. And if you do have any kind of further questions throughout, remember, we have Slido. We're going to hopefully answer all of those things at the end. So hopefully that's all right. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through the Clearinghouse website first. So this is just going to be very quick, and I just hope I'm almost next to near sure that everyone's familiar with this, but it's just to ensure that everyone's kind of familiar in terms of this element. And please, Zoe, Malvina, Jason, Alistair, do just jump in whenever, wherever, if that's possible. Okay. Just a note, so I'm sharing my screen, so I actually can't see anything that's happening in terms of like people being admitting or anything like that. So if anything is, Jason, Marvin, if you're able to just let me know and I can stop speaking up, that'd be great. Great. So first and foremost, this is the Clearinghouse website. It's changed. I think it's got its own website, but before, I believe, at least when I applied, it used to be Leeds Clearinghouse, and I think now they've they've now finally been able to just let that go, I guess. And so there's kind of a totally kind of a new website now. I wanted to specifically just show, you'll be familiar with kind of the interface, but I guess the main thing to kind of really take away here before we kind of dig deep into the form itself is these key dates. Sorry, I should have asked before saying this. Can everyone see this? Marvina, Zoe, understood, Jason. Okay, good. All right. That's good. So yeah, the main thing is, so applications are now officially open during September. So hopefully this is quite early, and this webinar will be of use for you. There is an apply early option by 25th October. I hadn't done that. I think my anxiety got ahead of me and I kept leaving it to the last minute. I don't know if anyone else can comment on that element if they did use that. But I know that, you know, it kind of saves £10 on that element. But this is kind of the major one, of course, on the 22nd November. But it should also be noted that even though the references are due in 6th December, at least for me, I believe this is only a couple of weeks apart. So if you can try and reach out, you know, to your references kind of throughout as you're doing your application, I think it just makes the whole process a little bit easier. I don't know if anyone wants to jump in just terms of contacting supervisors or not supervisors, well, references and things like that.
Yeah, Vicky, I think it's a good point. I would definitely say to give as much notice as possible to your supervisors, and just because of annual leave and Christmas stuff coming up as well. So yeah, just leave as much time as possible so they can really think about commenting on your application.
Yeah, and I think also kind of making their life as easy as possible as well, kind of it may be finding out what it is that you have to do, kind of key dates, and like summarizing that. I found that quite helpful to kind of have for people to refer back to.
Yeah, exactly. We'll speak a little bit more about it on when we get to the personal form, but I think this was the time I recall distinctly that you have to be quite pushy, and I had to send a couple of emails to really get them to respond back. Because they're busy. They're busy people. What can I say? So yeah, documents. So now I know there's one of the main crucial aspects, of course, is the transcription and kind of GBC documents and things like that. I think it goes into a little bit more detail on the actual sample application form. So I have a reference point, but you will need to kind of upload that as well. And this is all done before, you know, even after you've submitted the application in November. So you need to do it once they release it to January 2024. I believe you can't do anything about that. I don't know if there's anything anyone wants to add to that, or if I'm wrong in any way.
Yeah, I was just about to say maybe it's helpful to define GBC. So just because there might be first-time applicants or kind of third-year undergraduates. So GBC is basically graduate basis for chartered membership, and it's a standard that's set by the BPS, and just basically ensures that before people start clinical psychology training, is to ensure that they've already got a strong enough basis in terms of breadth and depth of psychology to undertake postgraduate training.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I believe you'll do that through the British Psychological Society website, and that would be the best way. I don't think the process is, again, I did it quite a while ago, and I don't believe the process is that difficult, but please. Oh, go on.
I was about to say, Vicky, so basically you don't need to, I personally didn't actually know about the GBC myself until I first applied. So basically you automatically get it, I think. You already qualify for it. So what I did was contacted my undergraduate university and basically asked them to write a letter to prove that my degree will confirm my eligibility for GBC status. And that was it.
Fabulous. So something I knew, I didn't know that. So there's a nice little maneuver there for everyone if you can do it that way as well. I think I must have done it a harder way too, because I remember speaking to someone. I don't know if anyone else wants to add. Please jump in because I can't see you guys. So yeah, Alistair, Marlene, by the way. So
basically, I just to back up what Jace said, you kind of was eligible automatically. Of course, I did. So then they actually preactively sent a letter out saying this is your confirmation for you in certain situations like DClinPsy. So yeah, you might have that as well.
Champion. Thank you so much, Alistair. Great. So now we're going to kind of pause a little bit here because this is going into a little bit of what we're not talking about, but these are other dates in terms of shortlisting, interviews and reserve lists. And like I mentioned at the beginning, we do have later webinars around kind of interview workshops and things because that's a bit more pertinent then. So yeah, that's kind of the really key thing. And then of course, on the website, entry requirements, place for specific courses. And there's also kind of a section here on About Us, which is actually much more easier to navigate than I remember in the last website in terms of just finding out like equal opportunity, number of places and things like that over the years. Does anyone have anything to add on this speaker-wise on the website, which might be helpful for us to go through before going on to the form?
I don't think so.
No, I guess it's just, again, for first-time applicants thinking about courses, just really take a look at the different course requirements. And if you're unsure about anything, just please do contact the courses and don't hesitate instead of kind of guessing. So we really encourage you to do that early.
Yeah, definitely agree. Just kind of like, for example, just like a side reflection, I know one of my friends who had wanted to apply 1 year and she had got kind of, for example, an interview at Surrey, but they require a driving license. And, given pandemic, it was, impossible to book driving tests and things. And unfortunately, that kind of interview offer was lost because of that. So just be wary of things like that. I know it is unfair just around kind of those aspects, but just recheck, right, what is the course asking for, because they will kind of call you up on it later on in the application process, for example. Right, so I mean, time's flown by. I don't know how this has happened. So let's just go through, let's start through the application itself. So just as a side note, this is a sample application. You can actually find this on the website itself. Can everyone see this, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, you can find this on the website. And you can as well, even if you don't feel comfortable in applying this year, I'll try and see if I can find it afterwards, but you can do kind of a practice application. And for those kind of, kind of whoever like a psychology supervisor, you can also share it with them and just get some feedback. So you don't actually have to go through the process, but it actually kind of gives you an indication of, what it's like, to kind of complete an application, because it is quite stressful. It is very stressful. They put kind of a lot of intensity in a very short space of time in what is something you don't get feedback on for like months later. So just be kind of wary of it in that element. So, right, I'm gonna go through some of the boring bits a little bit quickly because I think you guys might be familiar with it. But again, everyone kind of jump in. So this is just kind of details, personal details, kind of going through. Let me increase this a little bit more, sorry. In terms of kind of funding and UK working, it's a different, sorry, Jason, do you mind, I mind checking with you? Is it a different form entirely for international, or is it the same form and then there's a separate paragraph or anything like that?
Yeah, it's basically the same form, but you have to answer additional questions, and some universities don't accept applications by Clearinghouse, for example, at King's, you have to apply directly to King's.
Fabulous, thank you. So, okay, so great. So just kind of extra questions in kind of that element. Yeah. There is also some self-funding places as well, which I'm not familiar. Yeah, not all courses. This will be kind of that element as well. Sorry. Let me just move on. So you'll be able to choose, as you guys hopefully will know, 4 courses, 4 different ones. One thing I didn't actually realize as well is that the way it's kind of written, like it's not done in order. You can't have a preference. So it's not like we had put King's or anything like that. You just get offers and you don't. So you put four options and they're all kind of equally weighted as well. And they don't all have to be based in London or based in a particular area or anything like that. So it's just kind of understanding that element as well. We've spoken a little bit about GBC as well. So I'm just going to kind of go through this a little bit quicker because I want to spend greater time on kind of the reflections as well. Of course, it talks about kind of English language ability, aspects like this, and also relating it to the and all of the kind of the university qualifications being taught and examined and things. Now, this is something new. I don't know if you'd come across this, Alistair, and you don't, I mean, feel free to speak on it or not, but I don't believe this was there here. It was done in a separate part when I was at the application form, just kind of identifying kind of if you have a disability and the equal opportunities and whether it'll be seen. Is there anything else you can speak on it? It's fine if not, but I just wanted to double check.
Yeah, I don't exactly remember actually if it was in the same place previously or not, off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's okay. Not to worry. Not to worry. It was just kind of double check. I didn't mean to put it on the spot, but it's kind of just knowing here. So if you want to be kind of wish to be considered on the disability scheme, so it's great. I think this was something that I think other aspiring psychologists, they must have fed back around this, the application process, and they've obviously brought it a little bit up. So it is quite nice to see that, just knowing that. Okay, so suitability statements, just to kind of give a brief overview, and please anyone else jump in. You have to give an academic one. So that can be someone related to, I don't know, like undergrad or master's, or someone from a different course. I think someone has to jump in here who perhaps might have some PWP experience. I don't know if you can use someone from the course there, and then an experience one as well, which would be someone who's seen you in kind of in the profession itself. And that doesn't need to be someone where you're an assistant psychologist or anything like that. Can anyone else kind of speak a little bit more on it? If that's all right. Again, I can't see everyone, so apologies.
So I trained as a PWP, but then I didn't use any of the lecturers because they didn't supervise any research work or comment on the kind of ability to train as a clinical psychologist in terms of a research perspective. But I did use my supervisor, who was a high intensity CBT therapist, for my clinical experience.
Okay, fabulous. All right, okay. Is that because did you mention, sorry, Jason, that lecture-wise, they weren't able to kind of oversee kind of the academic, that element that much?
Yeah, I guess I can just base it on my own understanding for suitability statement, because it is so geared towards clinical psychology training. It's ideally you want to find someone who has an understanding of your kind of your research capabilities, but also your ability to undertake postgraduate training.
Yeah.
And I don't know if PWP lecturers per se, I don't know if you get so close to your PWP lecturers per se that they can comment on suitability. Sorry, that might be better phrased.
Okay. No, fabulous. So that's helpful. So I guess kind of that's perhaps, hopefully that might be helpful for some people who are on maybe either well-being kind of practitioner kind of programs, things like that. But I guess the large majority, at least when I applied as well, they did have to kind of recontact master supervisors for like dissertations or undergrad supervisors and these might be people you haven't spoken to in like 5, 6, 7 years. Does that kind of agree with the speakers? Is that fairly correct? Hopefully that's just not just my perspective. Okay, I clicked back and I saw nodding, so that's good. Right. Anything else to note that I've missed out here, guys? That anyone wants to say? No?
I feel like I should just throw in here that I think I was a bit unconventional in that I didn't have a suitability statement from a clinical psychologist or mental health professional supervisor, because the one that I had when I was an AP kind of disappeared, actually disappeared, and I couldn't trace where they'd gone to, because I went into a different job between being an AP and applying to the course. So I would say to people, don't be put off by that. I think eventually, like my referrer was someone who was like a service manager in the residential facility where I was working, and that was okay. You know, so if you don't necessarily have someone who can speak intricately to your clinical experience, you know, there may be other options, and it certainly wasn't an obstacle for me. I did not have a clinical psychologist or any psychologist who referred me as part of my application.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful, Zoe. And I think that goes to say as well, like, you know, for example, individuals who might be kind of like a support worker applying, they might not have the luxury of a clinical psychologist as a supervisor, and yeah, that shouldn't stop you. What was I going to say? There was another thing here which I think was of note. I'm not familiar with this, but I do know that if you do need to nominate someone with kind of like a personal connection, there's a section, there's a box later on here. I'm going to go back up where it talks about forgotten where it is, where it basically states why you haven't maybe chosen a supervisor who's not kind of an experience directly. So I'll see if I can find the box as we go through, but essentially what it shows is you just need to kind of note it in the personal statements later on in that choice. So I've just highlighted it there, so hopefully that makes sense to people. Okay, let's go through with, I think time is flying and it's not catching up with me. Okay, so qualifications. I think the main thing to really take away here is really looking at the entry requirements. We are not kind of you know, we're not familiar with every single course. So if you do have a kind of specific question, do ask it on Slido, but I think the best thing to do is check it. You know, Oxford will be different to Birmingham, which will be different to Glasgow, which will be different to, you know, UCL. They're all widely different. And I think, yeah, there was a time where I used to say like, oh, you know, I used to believe, sorry, I needed like a 2-1, I needed a first, like it's not the reality anymore. And I think generally you need to kind of look at the, it's kind of an amalgamation of not just kind of qualifications, but also experience as well. So that's probably the best thing to take away. Is there anything that people want to add to this part? No?
I just echo what you said. I think it's always helpful to reach out to courses. I don't know how much things have changed, but I know that when I applied, some courses did kind of score up academics and things like that. So yeah, I'm not familiar with that too much. So I just always suggest that people email courses if they're not sure. Yeah.
Fabulous. Thanks, Marvina. This is really helpful. I didn't have this when I applied, like all of this information. So please do read it carefully, because there's things like here which I wouldn't need to say, but like I would recommend, like, you know, write kind of your exact mark if that kind of helps, because that might show you that you have like an upper 2-1 for instance, and things like that. So okay, getting to the experience. So the way kind of the experience does is it explains it quite explanatory in above in terms of kind of the hours and the relevant work experience. Now I wrote all of my experiences prior to applying, even up to undergrad, including kind of voluntary and charitable things. I I don't know if anyone else wants to speak on this, but I don't think you need to be restrictive. I think it's the way that you kind of discuss it in terms of kind of, you know, the duties, the area of, because even that I do believe has a word count. So I think just kind of really share, because you'll be able to reflect on it later in the personal statement. Really what you want to harness here is basically what you've been doing, like kind of the key thing. So for example, if you're working in a post within kind of neuropsychology, you might want to talk about cognitive assessments and then talk about the type of people that you've worked with, the populations, and any other, I don't know, leadership opportunities that you did at presenting at MDTs or anything like that. So giving that range of experiences and reflect later on. And that's the big, I think, discrepancy that people sometimes are aware, because in the personal statement, they'll just kind of rewrite, oh, this is what I did. And that's kind of sort of things. Does anyone want to add to that? Or maybe just challenge me on that? I don't know. This is some of my own thoughts, and I know everyone is a little bit different. So
I'm not going to challenge you, but I was going to say it's really helpful. I found it really helpful to kind of copy everything that they need to know onto a Word document and see everything together, because I realized that I was repeating some of the duties for the posts that I had, which is obviously always going to happen. But what I found helpful was maybe seeing that, okay, if I've listed this duty here, maybe I'll show like something a bit different in some of the other roles. So it just kind of prompted me, okay, I've like said MDT working for all of my posts, maybe I'll take that out of one of the jobs, even though that is what I did, and maybe put like admin for blah blah, or yeah, just to like showcase as many, because there is a word count on there, and I found it helpful to see it all together, to draw those patterns.
Also just wanted to echo kind of what Melvin already said, that for trainee P2Ps and qualified P2Ps, that's exactly what I did, kind of adding things that showcasing additional skills that I gained from qualified post. And also I did it via bullet pointing. Nobody told me whether that's okay or not, but that's what I did, because I think that's more succinct and just tells people what you've done. And I was okay with it. So.
I'm also extremely lazy when it comes to doing job applications. So candidly, if you have any of your old, if you are like me and you kind of print out job descriptions for roles that you've gone for before, actually just pulling out some of the kind of the technical language that describes a role that you've done previously as described or defined by your previous employer can make light work, rather than having you sat there going, oh, what was it I did? You know, the old job descriptions can be really helpful. And if you can't find one for a job that you've done, see if you can find one for a job that is like the job that you've done, and you might find that you kind of lighten the load there a bit.
Just to jump in as well. I don't know if, as I was kind of coming from a PhD background, I kind of tailored my experience to be more clinically relevant. So pulled out the pieces that I think would be more supportive of the DClin application rather than say a research post or something like that. And just if you have multiple different roles and are not all clinically experienced, using those and trying to like pull out things that would support or boost your application.
That's really helpful. Thanks everyone. I'm just wary of the time, so I'm going to push. But yeah, I've just found it here. It's a 200 character limit, and I just looked up. That's around 35 words. So just be wary of this. It's things to kind of really hold in mind because of just how difficult it is. Right. Experience. And yeah, so this is another section just around any other periods, kind of for any other work experience, just around talking about it, and it gives examples as well. Okay, so this is the time where we're going to spend hopefully the most amount of time kind of discussing, and hopefully we can all share something to this effect around the personal statement. So it's again added some extra things, but really what you want to kind of take away from this one is really kind of understanding in what way have your work and under research experiences made you a better candidate for training in clinical psychology. So I'm going to start, if anything else comes to me, obviously after everyone kind of jumps in, like that'll be helpful. But for me, I added a bit of a structure to this. You know, I kind of talked about clinical, I kind of talked about research, and then like service user involvement and like other things as well, because it helped me kind of formulate like, okay, what are my experiences and what I'm reflecting on kind of each and every kind of component. And like I said, like 3,000 characters isn't that much. And I think one of the main things to take away from it is, for me, I liked quite like an XYZ approach, which a previous supervisor helped me kind of shared with me, which is this idea of, you know, you give a point, you kind of explain it, and you give an example straight afterwards. And I know that sounds like quite a lot, but if you're able to keep that kind of concise, it really shares what you're able to do. But on the addition of that, you want to kind of add a reflection as well. I think that's where sometimes it gets missed a little bit. And really kind of understanding what exactly that experience has made you better candidate for training in clinical psychology, because this question really harnesses that element of reflecting. So you've got the point, you've got the example. So that's just something that it was a little trick that I found a bit useful. So yeah, I don't know if people want to share their experiences of writing this and tips or tricks or whatever.
I'm happy to share. I found this statement really, really difficult. I was procrastinating and kind of didn't want to answer it because it's a lot. But I think what was helpful was kind of asking myself first, why specifically clinical psychology and not other routes of training, like counseling psychology? And that's just quite helpful to orientate myself to what a clinical psychologist is. And what might be helpful is kind of drawing out a timeline of all your experiences, including kind of your undergraduate and postgraduate training, etc., etc. And I think that's just a good way to kind of reflect on all the different experiences that you've gained, and also the learning that you've gained from those different posts. And I think what is helpful is to look at the core competencies of a clinical psychologist document provided by the BPS, and look at each competency and think about, I guess, kind of reflecting on how your experience may match to that. But also it's okay to identify gaps and learning points, because I think the next question is kind of thinking about what do you want to get out of training. So that, I guess, is a segue into helping you think about that. If there's anything else, I'll add.
Anyone else want to speak on this?
I didn't realize it was called XYZ. Maybe that's not, I don't know if you made that up or if that's actually a name, but that's quite cool. I think I followed it without knowing, but I did find it helpful to kind of have examples, obviously not specific. And some of my examples were like 2 words long, just like referencing like people that I've worked with, like the populations and things. What I found helpful as well is to almost have like I did have a structure, and I kind of divided it into like assessments, formulation, interventions, supervision, leadership, stuff like that, and just like covered like key points in subheadings. I know that doesn't work for everyone. Some people have almost like a story, but I guess it's just how your brain works and how you feel most comfortable kind of ticking as many boxes as you can.
Thanks, Noreen. Anyone else want to share any other kind of reflections? Or maybe just how they found it? Not necessarily, doesn't have to be tips, just can be anything.
I think, without getting into kind of the detail of what I put into my application, because I can't really remember, to be honest now, but I think what I do remember was thinking a bit in this kind of reflective aspect of the application, thinking about what it was about what I was doing at the time. Perhaps this is more relevant to people who are coming from outside a clinical role, which I was when I applied, thinking about what it was about that role that wasn't kind of meeting my needs and what I wanted to be doing, because I was working in research when I started training, And so being able to say, you know, I enjoy this role, but actually I would like to be doing X, Y, Z, was certainly part of what I wrote, if I remember, in this part of the form. Because it also gives you a chance, I think, in that way to think about, well, to show that you kind of understand the role of a clinical or trainee clinical psychologist and what might be different in that role to other things that you might be doing in psychology or beyond psychology, actually, you know. And it kind of, I think, demonstrates perhaps that you've thought a bit about, you know, why you want to kind of just get into it.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Zoe. I think the last thing also, oh, Alistair, unless you wanted to share anything, I'm just gonna. Right.
No, I think just to kind of echo what I said before, kind of my background was I had limited clinical experience. So for me, it was really around trying to, kind of explain how some of my past experiences can be translated to that and why I want to do that and why I've ended up going the route I have. So I think, if you don't clearly fit into a research or clinical, just having a perspective of that and trying to reflect that in the answer.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Well, thanks everyone. I think the one thing I guess just to final point out that just came up for me, I think there's like an intricate play between recognizing what your experiences are, but also perhaps for the unis that you're applying for. So King's is a little bit different. They champion more of a positivist approach. It's not social constructionist, for example, you know, compared to maybe other unis that I'm familiar with, like, you know, Salomons or Hertfordshire. So that's also something to think about when you're kind of writing your personal statement. And I think also just, I mean, I don't know if this is the case, but it's something that I thought about. And again, my supervisor shared with me when I was applying, and I do remember this, that like, there are like, clinical psychology itself is incredibly varied. So like Alistair meant, he's come from like a research background. I'm from a bit more clinical background. So people are coming from different other aspects, maybe even leadership. Maybe I know people have kind of got on who have just been predominantly from like a business base as well. So, and have totally changed jobs. So what I mean is that kind of amalgamation between clinical research, leadership, service user involvement, all of those are very important, almost like buzzwords to kind of think about. You know, we have so many things that you're doing within your job, and you don't need to be an assistant psychologist. You don't need to be a PWP. You don't need to be any of these titles. You can just be reflective on kind of the elements of like power or equality and diversity or risk. And all of these things are very important to just account for and to think about, but what makes you, you? I mean, we haven't spoke about it significantly, but I remember one of our webinars, someone shared that, okay, do I need to talk about my identity as an individual in this space? Like, is this the part I need to do that? And I know there's a part in background, we're going to speak about it, but you need to think about what's important for you. Is that what's coming up for you? If it does that, does reflecting on that element, does that make you a better candidate for psychology? It's like answering that kind of question as well.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, Vicky, because that's exactly what I did in the beginning of the personal statement. I know the space is very, very limited, but I just wrote kind of very, very short sentence just to really introduce myself and who I am, kind of talking about my identity and my own values and how that shaped me as an aspiring trainee clinical psychologist, because I think that really helps ground you and reflect on your experience in a more fruitful way. But yeah, I'm aware of word count, but I think it might be helpful.
Yeah,
to do that.
Fabulous. Okay, so we're going to move on, just in case just because I'm aware of time. I have just briefly looked at the chat, and there seems to be a lot of discussion around this question already, I think, about the publication dissemination. But I think, yeah, there's not a necessity. It's not like you don't get a place because you don't have a publication or anything like that. I think someone has I can't bring up the chat. I think my computer's going to crash, but I think someone's described quite nicely what dissemination does look like. So it can be, it can be a range of major different aspects. So yeah, please allude to that comment. I don't have it on view at this point. And then it also describes in press, which is quite helpful because I did use that, and I think it was waiting on kind of publication, but it hadn't been published yet. So I gave, like, for example, you can give like an ID as well, and I was able to give that. So that's something, that's another element to kind of think about. Background information. Okay, so these, I think the first question is the last kind of, I would say, the really big one. Before we do that, I'm actually going to talk about the second one because it's a little bit easier, so you can have a break, because this is really simple, because I think people overthink this, and actually the real emphasis here is just apart from psychology. So all I'm going to say is, please don't write and kind of, I guess, I think the only word I can think of is be a bit cocky, and be like, yeah, you know, I listen to, I don't know, psychology podcasts, but no, just be who you are. Just say what you like. If you like to just eat out every day, that's fine. If you like to go rock climbing, if you like to do this, it doesn't matter. Just be yourself, because I think that's what they want to hear. I really hope then no one disagrees with me on this, because I'm pretty sure that's the general consensus, isn't it? Because otherwise they've just got constant psychology. I think if anything, this question was written in for a breather for everyone else to read.
Yeah, I just want to add, I think the purpose of this question is because training is really, really challenging. You've balanced so many different demands on the course. It's just to basically see that you can look after yourself and there is a life outside of psychology. Yeah,
that's probably the best way I can summarize it. Exactly right. So really with that one, don't overthink it. You know, you don't need to be absolutely go all out as well. So just, yeah. Okay, this question I'm actually going to find a little bit difficult. I might put it to the speakers, because I realize I keep speaking first. I'm going to put it to the speakers because I don't know. So about what would you hope to gain from training? Does anyone have any initial thoughts on that?
I think with that question, I think it's set up in such a way that it's tempting to read it as, you know, tell us about what you expect to extract from the experience of training. But I think it would do any applicant well to think a bit about how they see that experience as kind of contributing back as well. You know, of course you will benefit from training. It's an incredibly comprehensive learning experience, but yeah, I wonder, thinking about your kind of self-development, and then as a kind of as an extension of that question, what that self-development is going to mean for you, and the services that you might work in longer term. I don't know what the other speakers think of that. And again, I don't remember what I said myself to that question, because I recognize it, but not what I actually wrote. I don't remember what I actually wrote, but
yeah, I just sorry to cut in, but I would just kind of echo that. I think how I phrased this was kind of more practical, what I practically want to gain from training, either skills or different experiences, but then also, what does that mean for me in my life? You know, how do I want this to echo? You know, do I want to support a specific demographic of people in the future? Why is that relevant to me, and how that'll impact me and kind of my rationale? So I think, just to echo what you were saying, that's how I approached it anyway.
Yeah, me too. So kind of having like an outlook as well, like what are you hoping for, and what will that allow you to do in the future based on your own interests or aspirations. Yeah, that's what I did too.
Yeah, fabulous. Thanks, guys. I mean, I just probably wholeheartedly agree. I think it's quite a difficult one, because it feels like you exhaust all your main points in the previous question. But I guess because this is looking to the future, and that's like, you know, it's very uncertain around kind of, you know, places and things like that. It's really moving forward, what you want to think. You can draw on what you enjoy in psychology at the moment and what you maybe want to develop on, or if it may be kind of other new things that you want to trial out. I think it's just really, there's a real level of, I guess, authenticity to be kind of championed in this question. So
Yeah, and another way of looking at it, I suppose, you could look at it from a slightly kind of organisational angle as well, couldn't you? So if you get offered a place on training, you will be going into training as a Band 6 trainee clinical psychologist, and the role of a Band 6 trainee clinical psychologist is well defined. But when you finish, you are going to be, you know, at a minimum you should be ready for a Band 7 qualified clinical psychologist role. So if you kind of contrast the job descriptions of those two roles, you see, if you like, where the expected developments are likely to take place. So if you're really stuck for ideas and thinking, I just don't know, you know, what to expect, or you're not so familiar with the role, then that's perhaps another way of kind of structuring your thinking about this. You know, this is what if I get this training place, this is what I'm going to be like. When I finish, this is what my expected competencies are going to look like. So how do I get there? And maybe think about what that could look like for you. Obviously, you're not going to know in advance what your placements will look like or what experiences and opportunities you might get along the way. But in general terms, the kind of gap between the Band 6 trainee and the Band 7 qualified role will give you some idea of where you might expect to grow as a professional in those 3 years.
That's really helpful, Zoe. Thank you so much. I think that's actually a really nice technique. I wish I kind of done this, like even like contrasting maybe just job descriptions, because I guess a takeaway I got from your comment as well is that people said this to me as well. Like, this is training, so you're not a completed product. You know, as much as you're selling yourself, you're not selling yourself as a completed product, because they don't want that. They still want to train you, which is such an interesting kind of it just sounds hypocritical essentially, but that is something to kind of think about. So it's just recognizing that you are still developing when you're getting onto training. Okay, let's just kind of, oh, there it is. This is the suitability statement that I was talking about from earlier, just mentioning. So you'd speak a little bit more about why you might not have chosen the experienced employer. I don't know why it's this far down though. Okay, yes. So this is, I'm not familiar with this question, sorry. Jason, is anyone familiar with this one? Because I don't think I think this might be a new question. I think this is just any other factors or further context in assessing the application. So I don't think this is necessarily like overtly considered, but it might be something to even give further details around perhaps your identity, which you felt maybe not be appropriate kind of earlier on in things. I think they obviously have examples here, but there's something to be kind of chosen a little bit carefully. Oh, go on, Jason. Sorry.
I was just about to say, I think it's kind of, I got really mixed advice, and kind of some people said don't add any more things to like that you couldn't add from the personal statement. But I personally reflected on my lived experience of mental health difficulties and how that impacted some of my earlier experiences and how that might, that was my own take of the question.
Yeah, that was likewise for me as well. I kind of filled out this section, but I just kind of used it as a very honest self-reflection of, like, have there been other things that have happened in my life, in my past, that have contributed to me wanting to do this, or certain parts of the application. So I think you don't have to fill it out, but I think if there are things and you kind of resonate with things that you think have influenced you, it's a good place to give that context.
I also wonder whether, and this, I don't remember this being part of the form when I applied either, but I also wonder whether if for whatever reason an applicant didn't feel comfortable with committing too much detail kind of to the record, as it were, you could put something in and perhaps say something to the effect of, and I would be happy to discuss this further at interview if that was true for you, if it was true for you. For some people, I guess they might feel like they don't want to say too much on an application form which is kept on record. Interviews are slightly different. There's, you know, there will not be a recording or a transcript as far as I'm aware. So if it was something that you feel like you do want to give a bit of context, but that would be something you'd be happier to do in the context of a kind of a chat rather than putting it down on paper, I guess you could flag that up you know, and say would be happy to discuss further, you know, in a different setting, if that's okay. If it's not, then obviously, you know, you don't need to say anything at all.
That's fabulous, guys. Thank you so much. Because I am aware that this form now has kind of significant contextual admissions, which is going to speak up very, very briefly. But yeah, I think I just agree. I think, like also Jason mentioned, there's a lot of mixed messages. I know some people who really went into it and used an opportunity to reflect even further and on kind of different elements, but it's kind of what you feel is comfortable here. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. That's where we want to kind of hear. Well, there's no right or wrong answer for anything of the application. We're just sharing our experiences. Should probably have said that at the beginning, but yeah, that's like the main kind of takeaway, especially for this one as well. It's really, you need to kind of think about what you feel comfortable and putting down. Okay, and this is contextual admissions. So I don't believe this is necessary, because there are kind of prefer not to says as well, but I think it's just to give further information that for maybe the course. I believe this is the first year that they're doing this, because I don't, is anyone familiar with these questions? Were they written? Okay, I've just seen some. Okay, so it might be that, because I don't remember the free school meals. I think maybe I
think this is in for me last year.
Oh, this is in for you last year. Okay.
I think so, yeah.
Great, because I do remember there's an equal opportunities, which is at the very end as well. But yeah, so it's just kind of, again, up to you in terms of that element. And again, it reiterates kind of the documents and then final consent and declarations. Okay, this is the part I was familiar with, the equal opportunities part, which again is not, you don't need to give consent or give consent. It's just to allow further anonymized data, which I shared on the Clearinghouse website. If you see the equal opportunities page, it just comes up on that. Yeah. Because we reached the end of the form, I don't know, in relation to all the speakers, I'm going to stop sharing. Does anyone have any final reflections, thoughts, comments about the whole form in general? Anything?
I think in a slightly boring kind of organisational vein, again, I would just come back to the issue of where this role sits within the NHS. So if you get this training contract, then you are going to be a Band 6 trainee clinical psychologist. And many of you will know, if you've worked in NHS settings, that some of our colleagues in other health professions, Band 6 would be considered like a very senior banding on other health pathways. So, which is not to frighten anyone, on the contrary, to make you think, as you read that application back to yourself, do you see in that application a representation of kind of where you are with things, and is it kind of truthful to who you are? But also, do you look like, sound like, write like someone who is a Band 6, who will be a Band 6 member of NHS staff? Because you will be. That is what you will be if your application is successful. And I think that's really important. Like, it's that could be a really strong guide for people in kind of evaluating when you've written it all out and all your answers are kind of filled in, whatever the details might look like. Can you look at that form and say, like, this is convincing? Like, if I, would I appoint me, basically? would I go for me as a Band 6 trainee clinical psychologist based on what's written here? And if you think the answer is no, tweak it a bit. If you think the answer is yes, well done. That's good going. But that would be my kind of final thoughts on it, I think. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Anyone else?
Yeah, I just really wanted to really echo kind of what Zoe said, and also just a very brief point about writing the statement. Personally, I found it unhelpful to kind of write really flowery language, because I think as a clinical psychologist, you'll be working with such a diverse, with many very different groups. So I think part of the statement is to show your ability to communicate your experience and information in a way that it can be easily accessible. So kind of just echoing Zoe's point, that it's also their way to assess whether you're writing like a clinical psychologist.
Fabulous. I'm just going to reiterate as well for the Slido, please use that in terms of kind of asking questions. I know there's a lot of questions on here. We will kind of potentially come back to it, and we might even have a think about how we can answer all the other different ones, but that will be the priority in terms of answering it. Hi Leila, how are you doing? But yeah, just as a final comment, I think the whole process is very difficult. It's very stressful. I think we all want to recognize that. And yeah, I just want to reiterate this again. There is no right or wrong way in terms of spotting. Every application is fundamentally different. You could probably submit the same application every single year, and one year you might get 4 responses and 4 offers, the other time you might not. It's so varied. The process is so different, and it's not a reflection of kind of who you are within psychology. It's just something to kind of really think about. But hopefully this webinar has given a little bit. So I know it's just over 1, so I want to kind of prioritize the Slido. So someone got it up, by the way. I think it's just loading on for me.
Yep, I've got it up. I can start going through the questions if that would be helpful.
Yes, please, Maureen. So, before you do that, let's just introduce Leila. Sorry, Leila, just kind of got ahead of myself. Would you be okay to introduce yourself rather than me?
Absolutely, thank you so much. Sorry, just to say, I am actually joining from my phone in a corridor, essentially a quiet corridor. I really apologise. Logistics meant I wasn't able to get a room and get on my computer in time. So I prioritise being here on time. So I hope that's okay. So if there's any background noise or background people, hopefully that won't be too distracting. I'm Leila Jamil. I'm a clinical psychologist. I trained at the King's course and qualified in 2020. And I now work in SLAM in South London and the Maudsley NHS Trust in a service working with people with psychosis. And I also work 1 day a week on the course at King's as a culture, equality, diversity and inclusion tutor. And I work closely with Diggy and Jason and Malwina and everyone from the Increasing Access Committee as well.
Yes, thank you so much for coming, Leila. I know you must be super busy. So, yeah, Malwina, are you okay to just lead on this element in terms of just choosing questions, and then we can all kind of, including yourself, just jump in? Would that be all right?
Yep, of course. The first question is the one with the most thumbs up. I think we did touch on this during the talk, but maybe just to kind of finalize an answer, just because, yeah, I keep seeing the thumbs ups going up. It's just about the publication question, and someone asked, should we still answer the publication question if we haven't got anything published, but do disseminate information within work? Yeah.
I believe the guidance, if I remember correctly, is that unfortunately they're only able to count peer-reviewed journal articles in publications, which I think is a shame, because I acknowledge there's lots of other great ways to disseminate work. But I guess from the point of sort of quality control, that's the reason that it's there, so that is a way, whether we think it's right or not, that is a way of kind of getting a quality control on the piece of work, the standard of the work and so forth. So I think if you don't have any peer-reviewed journal articles yet, don't worry about it. You can just leave it blank, would be my advice. Does anyone have a different view on that? I just want to check that out.
So we spoke a little bit around perhaps sharing any form of dissemination, because I'm just thinking about, if you haven't got anything published, you wouldn't want to leave it blank, if that makes sense. So I think it was just about reflecting on. So for instance, I led on a training when I was an assistant psychologist in CAMS, and I think even that element can be really helpful, because you can still speak a little bit more around kind of that element, if that makes sense. And that still is a form of dissemination, training wise, whether it's to kind of your peers and other staff members. And I think we touched upon that kind of earlier on in the hour, but you're probably right in the sense that it's weighted a little bit better on the peer-reviewed journals. But I think if you haven't, it's not to say that, oh, let's not write anything. I think it's more to reflect on anything that potentially might be still some form of dissemination, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's a long time since I applied and looked at the form, so I can't quite remember the exact question. I think it's really good to give examples of other forms of dissemination and leadership, but I wonder if that's answering the question they're asking, and whether it might be better to draw on those in other aspects of the form personally, because I think the question, if I remember correctly, is quite specifically about publications, and unfortunately those things wouldn't count. And so it would be better to put those in your other sections where they would count towards demonstration of, say, leadership skills and so forth. Would be my view, but I haven't looked at the form in a little while, so I don't want to mislead or confuse. So I would check what the Clearinghouse says.
Yeah, and I think there was a clear line that sort of emphasised that it's not that there's a penalty applied for not having published, you know, any research. It's just that there will be people who are applying who may have come from a purely research background, and it will be very important, I suspect, for those applicants to be able to showcase that that's something that's been important in their development. Whereas for other people who might be coming with bagloads of clinical experience, you might, you know, they will probably have an easier time in some ways of speaking to that. You know, so I think it's there to capture that for people that perhaps have, you know, have come from a more purely research background. But it does, the form very clearly said, it's not that there's a penalty for not having that research publication background. It's just there to capture if it's part of your trajectory, I think.
I think that's helpful, Zoe, and I think that you have to score each application on a number of criteria. Exactly. And so that's one of the criteria where you could get points, but it's not a penalty if you don't. And the reason I'm saying that I would only put it there if it is a peer-reviewed article is because I don't believe they'll be able to count it otherwise, so you'll just get a score of 0 no matter what you put. So that's why it's better to put those other examples in other sections where you where they would count towards your scores, where they're looking for things like evidence of leadership skills, for example.
And I think, like, there was someone asked a question in the chat about this, and I did answer, but in case other people didn't see the answer, I mean, within my cohort, and I can only speak to my cohort, you know, a lot of people have not published, so they're there having not published. It's not, I think King's gets a bit of a reputation for being, you know, quite research intensive, and that reflects, you know, the reputation of King's at large. But there are plenty of people within my cohort who have not published and who will not publish, but are very competent clinicians. It doesn't have to be part of your application. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's really helpful. I think we've only got 20 minutes. I think we should push in terms of the frequency of how many questions we can get answered, if that's all right, Malvina.
Thank you, everyone. The next question is, different courses have different recommended structures for their personal statement. How would you balance this when applying to 4 unis?
I was just going to, the only thing I have with this, I think you're right. I'm just going to challenge in terms of the first line of it. I'm not aware of any recommended structure from a course, if that makes sense. Because I'm reading the question, it says different courses have different recommended structures. And I'm not familiar with that. Maybe different unis may place greater priority on some elements. Perhaps I think they're shifting. I think there is a cultural shift away from that as we're moving forward. But so, for example, like research, like King's and Birmingham, very research focused, whereas, yeah, there might be some other elements in terms of really reflecting on yourself and identity. If we're talking about Hearts or like Solomon's and things like I've mentioned, but I don't believe there's a recommended structure as
So sorry, someone, and I didn't realize this, I didn't apply to Manchester, but Manchester apparently requires headings. Someone has helpfully said in the chat.
That's helpful, thank you.
Yeah, someone has just retweeted that in the chat.
I mean, I think subheadings are generally helpful, and that was something I was going to suggest, because I think you want to basically make it as easy for the person reading your application, bearing in mind they're probably reading a lot in quite a short period of time, to pull out the key bits of information that are going to give you the points, okay? And So I do think subheadings are helpful, and how I would personally structure it, and I think this would work for most courses, would be to look at the job descriptions of, say, an assistant psychologist or a newly qualified clinical psychologist, a band 7 clinical psychologist, and pull out the groups of the kinds of skills and experience that they're looking for. So, for example, clinical skills, use of supervision, research skills, leadership skills, etc. Those are just some, reflective practice, whatever. Those some ideas, and then group, start with some bullet points under each of those headings, and group all the things that you want to say into those headings, and then expand on that. And you can collapse headings down if you feel like you're repeating yourself, and actually, supervision and reflective practice go well together, for example. But it's a good way to start, and then you can keep whatever subheadings help to structure your application. And if Manchester have a particular structure and you're applying to them, then obviously go with that, and hopefully that will make sense for the other courses too.
Yeah, I think that's probably the way I'd kind of think about it. Like, I think someone just read is, do you complete one application that's sent to all? So that is the reality. It's one application sent to 4 unis. If one uni is saying one specific structure, you'll be lending itself to that uni, but perhaps different across the other ones. It might be that it says here Manchester is like assessment, formulation, intervention, service development, research. You could very much just include those components in, which might be helpful. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of that's what I would kind of take away with those elements. Anyone else has anything else to add?
That's really helpful. Thank you, everyone. I might move on to another question just so we get through as many as we can. There's another question that a lot of people want the answer to. Can we use abbreviations such as EG in applications? Does it come across too informal? I don't remember exactly word for word my application. I don't know if I used EG or abbreviations of that sort, but
I think it's fine to use any abbreviations that you would see in the academic literature, for example. So EG would be one that you would see. So I would say that's fine. Equally, IE would be fine. But I'd probably avoid using any abbreviations that appear more colloquial, that you wouldn't see in like a written document that was of a professional standard, or acronyms that stand for very specific things, such as, I mean, CBT is a very common one, but still, it's not good practice to use those acronyms because you may be excluding people who don't have that knowledge, bearing in mind that we do have people who come from a lived experience background reviewing forms as well, I believe. So, they won't necessarily have all of that technical jargon. So fine to use kind of standard abbreviations that you would see in the wider academic literature, but avoid very specific acronyms or colloquial acronyms.
Yeah, I think some people are asking, I think if you introduce the term before using the acronym, I think that would be okay. But yeah, maybe not straight into AP or CP.
That's what I was about to say, Malvina, that I introduced like Peter P was psychological wellbeing practitioner, and then a bracket Peter P and referred to Peter P throughout. That's what I did.
Yeah.
Great. Next one.
Okay, I might have to put Zoe on the spot here, if that's okay, but if not, we can just move on. There is a question specifically for Zoe, and it says, how did you find managing the work-life balance with a young child?
Good question. Well, she survived, so that's as did I. Yeah, I think what I would say is that combining parenting with training is, for the most part, not very different to combining any full-time job with parenting, because it is ultimately a full-time job, and your parenting needs, regardless of role, have to somehow kind of fit around that. I would be being disingenuous if I said that around deadlines in third years when you've got a thesis to write and paperwork to complete, that there is a bit more to do. I would also be lying if I said I didn't, occasionally work into the evening or have to do a bit on the weekends. But on the whole, that has not been my experience of training. And I really want to emphasize that, because I think parents, bring a certain something to the course. And, I know that from King's perspective, they are really keen to, for parents to feel like this is not, an application is not off limits for them, that they can do this and they can. To kind of emphasize that, so another responsibility that I have as a trainee is that I co-chair, in fact, with another parent, our Childcare Responsibilities Committee, which is there to meet the needs of parents throughout the different years of training. And that's been a brilliantly supportive group. And I think there's a huge amount of thought that goes on behind the scenes about the needs of parents who do training on the King's DClinPsy. And my experience, and I can only speak to my experience, but has been that I've been really well supported to manage my parenting responsibilities alongside training. And when things haven't worked as well as I would have liked, and when things haven't worked as well as kind of the parent collective on training has liked, we have fed that back and changes have been made. I know it's a disappointment to some people that we don't have a part-time offer for parents yet. I don't think that's set to change anytime soon, unfortunately, but it is on the radar of the course to kind of to think about in the years ahead. But for now, with what is there, I have found it a really positive experience. And I think what I would also say to any parents who are in the audience today is that children have a really good way of kind of inflicting some boundaries on your work, which is certainly my experience throughout. So a flip side of thinking about it as a juggle is that, having parental responsibilities had, really forced me to kind of manage my work and to pull back from it when I needed to. So if you are a parent and thinking it might or might not be for me, I would just encourage you to apply, because you will find a way of managing, and the course would be really welcoming of you. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Zoe. Hopefully that was helpful to our audience. If it's okay, I'll move on to another question.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Malvina, sorry, I know there's lots of questions, but I can't speak to the parenting experience, but I just want to widen it out, because there's probably lots of people who have other kinds of caring responsibilities as well. And just to say that I personally did have some other caring responsibilities when I was on training, and I had a similar experience to Zoe, where you have to be honest, it is going to be an additional challenge, but it can be managed. You will be supported as long as you're able to be open and honest about, what you need and what's going on for you. And that actually it's sometimes a good thing, because it makes you switch off from the work and you have to focus on other things. And, training could easily creep into every part of your life if you weren't careful.
Yeah, and I think as well, to add to that, Layla, for everyone who comes onto the programme, the course wants you to succeed. They don't want you to fail. So if you have got stuff in your life, whatever it looks like, if you feel able to be as kind of open and honest about that stuff, there will be support available to you. It's in no one's interests on the programme that you don't get through training and kind of come out swinging at the other side of it, So that doesn't mean that you have to be kind of, greatly detailed and explaining what's going on behind the scenes. But in my experience, if you can be open about what you've got going on, the course will be receptive to that, and they will try and make the experience as easy as possible for
you. I'll move on to another question. So there is one that's also quite popular. Is it important to address all of the points from the job and person specification in the personal statement and experience section of the application?
I would say yes, if you can. You want to try and address it as many of those as you can, because that's what you're going to be scored against, just like any other job application. Obviously, you may not be able to score for every single one, as we've acknowledged, and that's fine because they're looking at you overall as a whole. But the more points that you can evidence, the more points you will get.
Yeah, I think that's a nice swift answer. I think that's really it. It will be very hard. It's very difficult, but if you can try and do as much as I think, and also some points might be answering multiple kind of aspects of the job description. So I think don't overthink it. Don't feel too bogged down. It is difficult, but yeah, I think that's the only thing we can kind of discuss on that.
And no one ever meets 100% of the criteria when they're applying for a job, right? I mean, it's there will always be things that you are very strong on and things that you are less strong on, but that is not to say that you aren't entitled to apply. And I think sometimes being aware of the areas in which you are perhaps less strong and where you can develop is really valuable. Like, no one comes onto training with everything in order. If you had everything in order, you wouldn't need to do training in the first place.
Great, thank you. I'm just mindful of the time, so this might be the last question. So what is the real criteria for candidates to be successful? I have heard too many varied perspectives on this. I think that is $1 million question to our panel.
I'm not really going to answer the question because I think that it's a very difficult question to answer, but I guess what I'm going to say, what I think I would value as someone reading these applications, interviewing people, would be able to see that whatever range of experience they had, whether that's lived experience, whether that's clinical experience, whether that's research experience, they're able to bring that together and reflect on that and really make sense of how that's informed why they want to train as a clinical psychologist, what they're going to bring to clinical psychology, what things they're going to already be well established in, what things they're going to need to develop further, and that they're authentic about that as well. I think it doesn't really answer the question, but I think there is no winning formula or equation, but those are probably the principles that kind of underpin a good application to me.
Yeah, I would agree. I think $1 million question is probably right. And if we knew the answer to that question, we would, I'm sure be bottling it and selling it. But I think what Layla said is absolutely right. And the authenticity part is important because in the event that you get called to interview, you've got to be that person who you've written about on the form. And if there's a discrepancy, if the person that you have put into the form is not really you and you find it hard to be that person interview, I think the interview experience would be really tricky. So be yourself in the application. That's fine. And yourself is good enough, and then you can be that person at interview, and that coherence I think is nice to see. It can, I'm sure, make for a really uncomfortable interview process if you just kind of feel like you've caught yourself out essentially by the application. You have to be someone who you're not when you're finally sat in front of a panel of interviewers.
Fabulous. Do you have to? I'm just thinking of the time. I think that might be a nice place to press pause because I know it's been quite a long time. It's been an hour and a half. I just wanted to ask, as a separate question, does anyone have any final, from our speakers, any final just reflections, thoughts, messages, or anything like that that we can give to kind of, aspiring psychologists around kind of applications, in general?
You may have already covered this, and it probably is a little bit of a cliche, but I do think it's really important to try to enjoy the journey of getting on to training rather than just trying to sprint there. And that's because training is hard. It is hard and it's a lot. And the more that you've been able to do before you get onto training, the more that you've been able to reflect on that and enjoy that and develop from that, the better position you'll be in to get onto training. And to also normalize that rejection is hard, and you know, we've all been through it. I applied, I think, 3 times before I got on. I had many jobs that I didn't get before that, trying to get experience, and it is tough. And you know, for most people, if they persevere, if they're able to persevere and to tap into different resources of support, they will get there eventually. And actually the time that it takes to get there sometimes is the time they need to really be ready and in a good position, and trying to accept that and enjoy that process and learn from that process is really important.
Thanks, Leah. Anyone else? No, I think that was a really sweet ending, and I also can't really think of anything else to add on to it. So I think we might bring it to a close there. I just want to firstly just thank all of our speakers, Alistair, Zoe, Marina, Jason, and obviously Leila for joining for the Q&A. It's been amazing. I hope you guys did find it useful kind of going through it. Like I mentioned, we're all part of the Improving Access Committee. So we will have kind of future webinars. Stay tuned. It'll be accessed via kind of Eventbrite, and we might advertise via like Twitter and kind of, you know, some emailing lists as well. But just want to thank you all for coming. I hope you guys enjoyed it.